going to begin with lighting our own Advent candle, which helps us remember the season that we're in and its significance. And I have given 2 of you readings, and I'll light the candle when we get to that point. Reader 1.
The first week of Advent, we remember the gift of hope through Christ. The prophets of Israel spoke of the day when all people would live in harmony, peace, and justice. Though this future is hard to see or even imagine, we hope that it is possible.
As we light this candle, we remember that it was in cruel circumstances and from an unlikely place, a manger in Bethlehem, that God came to give light and hope to the world. As we light this candle, we are reminded to be alert and to watch for the light of Christ in the most unlikely places and the people, and in the least pitiful circumstances.
We light the candle of hope. Come, Lord Jesus, bring us hope.
Hope is a simple, common word. We use it in everyday language, right? And yet in the context, it takes on really deep and profound meaning, with specific reference to some of the great scriptures and stories and concepts of the Christian faith. So here's your writing, and it'll be brief and painless, I promise, but fruitful, I hope. Hope. So those of you at home, I invite you also to find a piece of paper and pen. This is only for your own eyes. You don't necessarily have to share any of this. So I'd like you to write 2 things. First, bring to mind a situation in the world or in the life of someone you know, not yourself, that seems to be hopeless. And just jot it down. It might just be a word to help you remember later. That's how much this is. I'll say that again. Bring to mind a situation in the world or in the life of someone you know, not yourself, that seems to be hopeless. And jot it down. So part 2. Now bring to mind a time in your life when things seemed hopeless for you. And jot it down. Again, just doesn't have to be the whole story. You know the story. Just a word or 2 might do it. Or a phrase. Okay, a sentence. Bring to mind a time in your life when things seemed hopeless. Our first video is from Danielle Schroyer. She holds a Master of Divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary. She's a Lebanese-American author, speaker, former chaplain, and pastor of a large church in Dallas for 10 years. She lives in Dallas. She mentions in this clip Moltmann very quickly. It deserves an explanation. Moltmann is Jürgen Moltmann, one of the most famous and important theologians of the 20th century. He's 96 years old, still with us, very vital. And his most famous book was 1963 or 64, A Theology of Hope. In the Christian world in the 20th century anyway, he's the go-to guy on hope. And our second video is actually going to be Professor Moltmann. But she mentions Moltmann, and I wanted you to know, what was that? Here we go.
What does hope mean to you? I hear Christians, people say hope. Is Christian hope different?
That's a tricky question. I think that people hope in a whole lot of things. I guess what makes Christian hope different is that if you believe what Moltmann says, that it's backed up by God's promises. And so we're not just like, oh, hoping that our team wins and it could sort of either happen or not happen, or we're hoping that, we get that job, which we may or may not get. But when we have Christian hope, we're actually saying we're hoping for something that God has already promised to do. And so, yeah, Christian hope is different because we trust that God will do what God said God would do. And what God's saying that God will do is make all things new. And so, yeah, Christian hope is simply that way of saying, yeah, it sucks right now. It's the worst right now. But God said, behold, I'm making all things new. And we trust that God finishes all the work that God starts. So I think Christian hope is everything. I don't know how else we get up when we feel like the world is just dark and horrible, or when we feel like we're dark and horrible. I don't know how else we get up except for to say, the story isn't finished yet, and we don't know how it's going to get there, and we don't know what's going to happen between now and then, but we know that the ending is going to be this. That's what hope is. It's just the assured ending of consummation, that God will fulfill and make whole all the things.
How do you get to trust?
Yeah, trust is more tricky because I guess that depends on our relationship with God, right? Like if we, in our lives, have had moments where we feel like God has come through on something, it's easier for us to feel like we can trust God in the bigger things that we can't see yet. The hard thing is I have so many friends, and I've been in times when it doesn't feel like God has come through on promises. That's hard. But I think one of the reasons that we have Scripture, one of the reasons that we still read it and share it as a community of faith and say these stories inform us, is because I feel like, honestly, from beginning to end, it's a story about figuring out whether God is trustworthy or not. Like, for better or worse, whatever else Scripture is, it's a story of a bunch of people figuring out, who is this God, and is this God trustworthy? And, ultimately, to me, I know Revelation gets such a bad rap, but the end of Revelation is so beautiful because it's this way of saying, no, you can trust it. Do you remember what I did for Abraham? Or do you remember what I did with Jesus? He died and I brought him back. Nobody thought that was possible, but I've made good on many promises. And
killed babies. Yeah,
right.
He's awesome.
Definitely not killed babies.
He did?
We have sometimes killed babies. Yeah, I don't know. I think, so I studied Hebrew for 4 years, and one of my favorite words is God's steadfastness, which it gets quoted in Scripture. In sermons all the time. But steadfastness is a really good way of describing that trait of God. At some point you realize God is the most anchored, centered, consistent thing going. Like, all the other things can fall away, but God still loves us, and God is still faithful. And so when you have that kind of trust, if you can get to a point in your own faith where you feel like that's true, even in just a tiny way, or if you have people around you that think that's true and remind you of it when you forget, then that's enough to hold on to give you that Christian hope that keeps you standing up and moving forward and trying to be a better you the next day.
Is that Christian hope like in a separate stratosphere, or how does that?
I don't think
how
hope.
How do you get in on that, that relationship with God?
Yeah.
Saying that would be awesome if that was true. How do you do that?
How do you do it?
If you were sitting on here on a park bench with somebody and they're like, you can have a relationship with God to get hope. What do you? It's like a simple thing, but it's the same thing. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe part of our problem is we want it so quickly. And this is probably a very unpopular answer, but I don't think we get that relationship with God quickly, I think it just takes a whole lot of time. It's just, you start out maybe having a little bit of faith because you think the idea of God is good, and that's maybe enough to get you started, or you start out following Jesus because you think his story is really compelling, and then that's enough to get you started. But it just takes a lot of time of, being present with God and being in relationship with God and feeling like, you're communing with God in prayer or through communion or through your community of faith or through friends that are in your life. And through that really slow process, you know, hopefully get to a place where you feel like you know God, and that the God you know is actually trustworthy, despite all the other things people say about God.
There's other things?
There's lots of it.
So I invite you to reflect on Schroyer's, no more writing, I promise, unless you want to. I invite you to reflect on Schroyer's comments about Christian hope. What is unique about Christian hope, according to Daniel Schroyer? What are some of the important aspects of Christian hope?
Well, what struck me is steadfastness, and it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not overnight. So go ahead. No, I'm just saying that I think so much of Christianity is being born historically, you know, being born again and boom, it all happens. But no, that's not the way it happens.
So she talks about Christian hope seems to be centered on the steadfastness of God. I served a church once in Arlington Heights Congregational UCC, and they had lots of banners. One of the banners was, it said, a still point in a turning world. A still point in a turning world. And she references that phrase, still point. That's actually a quote from T.S. Eliot, who, I don't know if T.S. Eliot was talking about God or not, but the point is, what's our still point in a turning world that provides foundation, steadfastness, a rock, if you will. What else did Schroyer say about hope?
I took away, in addition to what Paul said, God's promises to make all things new. And that depends a lot upon our trust and our faith in God, because we do tend to want things quickly. But then the second part of that I thought was really interesting was when she said, not verbatim, but the extent to which you're able to have that trust and faith oftentimes depends upon what your own individual relationship is, in fact, with God.
Is hope the same as optimism? I hope I get that job. I hope I get that parking place. What would Schroyer say about that?
No. Deeper.
Deeper.
It's not just hoping for certain things, but it's just a state of being, of hopefulness.
And Annie Kay said, the renewal of all things. That's a lot bigger than, I hope I find that stray sock if I draw it. The renewal of all things. It's a broad, cosmic, to use a very churchy word on the first Sunday of Advent, it's appropriate for today, eschatological view. It's not just within reach, it's beyond our reach. And yet we start living in a way today that leads us forward toward that promised end. The readings, the readings traditionally for the first Sunday of Advent are about the eschaton, the end. It's like, welcome to church on first Sunday of Advent. It's all cheery and happy. The New Testament readings, anyway, are always about the end. Welcome to Advent. It's about the second Advent, not the first Advent. First Advent was Jesus coming. The second Advent is the final consummation. Final Advent. In that sense, Christian hope. But is it helpful today to believe that in the end all things come out all right?
Well, considering the state of the country, the new country, world might be involved. We had better hope for way beyond, because right now it's kind of a mess. And regardless of the goodwill of people of sanity, there is a core in our country that has been developing for decades. This isn't a new thing. It just got a voice, if you know who, and coalesced this underwriting thing, which I met in Nebraska in the 50s when the John Birchers put their voice aloud. And I had discussions with my youth there at the college, earnestly about these things.
I like the phrase hope beyond hope. Hope is really hope beyond hope. It's hope beyond what you can see today. Yes.
And
And again-
also in response to that question, Jeffrey, I'm thinking of, help me out, the Jewish theologian.
Heschel?
Yes, of Heschel's responses when, you know, you wonder where was God, and his response was, where were you? That's what that question is. Is there hope? Is it useful to have hope today? That's what makes me think. That's what it made me think of.
So I'd like you to go back to what you wrote at the beginning of our session today, and some of you are just joining us. We welcome you. I asked people at the beginning of our session today to quickly jot down two things. One is, what's a situation in the world or in the life of someone else you know that seems hopeless? And secondly, remember a time in your own life when things seemed hopeless. So go back to that and ask yourself, how does Danielle Schroyer's comments about hope speak to these situations? Just reflect on that in your own heart and mind. Right? How does Schroyer's comments about Christian hope relate to what you wrote down?
The long view. Necessary.
Okay, we're going to go to our next clip, which is of Jürgen Moltmann himself. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry. Oh, a musical interlude. And then Moltmann. The words of this song are "Wait for It Now."
Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it now. And wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it now. And we see the light coming fast, coming fast. We see the light coming fast. And we feel the hope come at last, come at last. We feel the hope come at last. So wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it now. And wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it now. And we find our truth on the path, on the path. We find our truth on the path. And we're free from the chains of our past, of our past. to move on from the past. So wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it now. And praise for it, praise for it, praise for it, praise for it, praise for it now. And we see the light coming fast, coming fast. We see the light coming fast. And we feel the hope come at last, come at last. We feel the hope come at last.
Something that feels like.
Yeah, thank you for asking. That's Shelley Coley. Shelley, spelled S-H-E-L-L-E-E. Coley, C-O-L-E-Y. Were those images despairing, hopeful, or both?
Yes.
Christian hope doesn't mean denying struggle of the past, the present, and likely the future. Doesn't mean ignoring it, minimizing it, running away from it, but seeing our way to hope through struggle. Here's Moltmann, as promised. This is Mr. Theology of Hope.
What is the theology of hope, and how do you maintain hope in the face of so much despair in the world?
Yeah, let me start with the second question. Because there's so much despair in the world, I hope, and I proclaim hope in spite of despair. I found an old and ancient confession of the Church of Aquileia in Italy. They said to Christ, "You are the hope of the despaired." And despair is presupposes hope. It is the ruins of hope in which let us despair. With Christ, I think you are reborn to a hope out of sadness and despair. So many people witness to that.
Again, asking the question like my kid would ask me, where does hope come from?
From the spark of life within you. The more you love life, the more you hope, in general terms. And the more you hope, you experience life. Good life and bad life and success and failure, but that's life.
So how does Moltmann, the great teacher of Christian hope, how does he understand hope? What did you take away from his brief comments there?
Well, I thought it was interesting. He seemed to say that hope, I think his words were, comes from the spark of life within you, which implies that we're born with hope. And just have to force yourself sometimes to recognize that, to embrace it, and to what we were talking about earlier, take the long view.
And to go with the metaphor, provide kindling for it, for that spark.
Maybe hope is also a gift to Homo sapiens rather than animals. I wonder if animals have.
My dog does. Vigorous with hope.
I think it's a hopeful way of thinking about hope, because it reminds me of teachings where you think about, the fight between faith and doubt. Well, you can't have one without the other, as they say. There's two sides of the same coin. So hope cannot exist without despair, he called it. In his, English is not his first language, but he almost paused despair as the opposite of hope. And so I feel good because it's always there.
Yeah. Oh, yes, Andrea, thank you.
Forgive me, I need.
Well, it's a bit of a survival instinct too.
Yes, say more about that.
Well, I mean, there's something in us that wants to survive. Why do we want to survive? Well, we must think there is a reason to want to be here. And to me, that kind of translates to hope, because the current situation isn't always good, but we want to be here hopefully for what could be. I think a lot of us can envision a world where things are a lot more perfect or a lot closer to what we want. And so we stay here for that reason. I mean, if we didn't have hope, I think a lot of us would just kind of say, well, I'll throw in the towel. And I don't know, I mean, the survival instinct is also something animals have, so I don't know if they lack hope. With them, it's probably more of a raw emotion. They don't intellectualize it. But, anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you. Yes, Andrew.
It reminds me of a group of kids in Africa who, when you look at their surroundings and where they are from, you would think they are of the worst poverty. And they have been dancing on the YouTube, just having fun. They create like a bandstand, and they use trees, anything that they come across, and use it as a gesture, an instrument. And somehow they had been found and they were featured at the FIFA just last week. So hope brought them to the whole world. That little hope they had. And now there are going to be some people. You have to pay to go see them.
So hope is born of hopelessness through despair. This is an important note that we don't need hope if everything's perfect. We need hope because things are not perfect. In fact, things are terrifying sometimes. Individually, families, communities, the world, etc. I don't know if you quite got what he was saying about an inscription he found in the church in Italy. Speaking of Christ, the inscription said, "You are the hope of the despaired." The despaired. Don't know if that's a real word, but maybe in Italian it is, or in Latin. I'd like you to return once again to what you wrote at the beginning of our time together. That situation in the world or in your own life that seems hopeless or has seemed hopeless. How do Jürgen Moltmann's reflections on Christian hope speak to those situations? Reflect in your own mind and heart. The next presenter is Curtis Paul DeYoung, someone that I met and had breakfast with once. He is currently the CEO of the Minnesota Council of Churches, the author of books on reconciliation, social justice, racism, and cultural diversity. I met him when he lived in Chicago, and he was the CEO of the Community Renewal Society.
Where are you seeing the word made flesh? What gives you hope?
That's a great question. I think some days I don't have hope, and that's okay. There's a writer named Miguel de la Torre who is struggling with this idea of hope, and is even hope an evidence of the fact that we're privileged, so that we can be hopeful. So I think it's God's work. That hope piece is God's work, and that's where I find my hope. It says God gives me hope. So I believe in resurrection. I believe in new life. I believe in hope. But when I look at what's going on in the world, it's hard to say there's hope minus the set of circumstances and conditions that come with your social location. In my case, my privilege gives me the ability to be hopeful for perhaps my own life, but for the world. So I do believe that there's hope, and on some days I have hope. Other days I just have to trust God, that God's the source of hope. So I think that's just something that's hitting me in my late 50s.
You look good, brother.
Thank you. Thank you. But when I think after you've worked at stuff for a long time, you see change, but it's much slower, it's incremental at times. And but I don't think the opposite, hopelessness, is going to help me or is an option. So I'm more about moving forward in faith and being faithful and asking God to bring the hope to the equation.
Who carries your faith when you're hopeless?
In my case, there is a sense that I have a deep trust in God and experience with God, that even days that I don't want to believe that there's a God, or I don't see the action of God, there's too much ways I've seen God already in my life, that it's for me, there's no way I can say there's no God, because I've seen God at work in my life. So I can argue with God, I can have a difference of opinion with God, I can say, where are you, God? But I've seen God in very deep and personal ways. And that helps sustain me. And I guess that is a source of hope as well, that God is in the equation.
Who's God to you?
Yes, the hardest questions.
Sure, tell him, brother, let him, sure.
Who is God to me? Well, I certainly see God in my relationships with other people, but I think there is a God that's hard to define. It's almost the language of the mystic is the language that I need at this point, that there are these moments of time where it's as though you can almost reach toward eternity and touch God, and it's sometimes a very short moment.
Curtis Paul DeYoung, what is Christian hope? What's it rooted in?
Well, it has to be, since it's Christian hope, it has to be based on the faith in God, and in God as something that cares about us and is incrementally moving us in the right direction.
So, yes, please.
I think that hope is important, like when you wake up in the morning, you get to pray, and you pray before you go to bed at night, and that's hope, and you don't have to get so down about it, you know, because you wake up every morning and you thank God that you're here, you know, and it's not that you're here, but, you know, that He made another day. He made another day and He made us hopeful.
Thank you, Verna. That's beautiful. It's very much aligned with what Curtis Paul Young is saying, that I think that Christian hope is not rooted in a God who's far away or only a concept in your head, but experienced in your life. He says at one point, like, how do you explain this? You have to turn to the language of the mystics. The language of the mystics, not the theologians, but the mystics, the people who are about poetry and art and music and explaining the palpable reality of God rather than just figuring it out as a philosophy in your head or a proof of God's existence as if something can be easily produced. Kurt, yes, please. Nancy?
Does this have to be so personal? Could it, I mean, it suddenly occurred to me that this is going against what I've been learning here. Yes. It has to do with the world's peace and
right.
So
these 4 weeks during Advent, we're looking at peace, joy. Sorry, wait, I know the order. Hope, peace, joy, love. How do we experience them? And then how do we see them and live them in the world? So if you're asking a pastor, does this have to be personal? I would say if faith isn't personal, then it's not faith. It's got to start with some kind of inner experience, not conviction only in the head, but based on, there's no other word here but the mystical word experience of God. And this doesn't have to be the God of the Sunday school God, you know, with the white beard in heaven on a cloud on a throne, sending down thunderbolts, rewarding good behavior with heaven and bad behavior with hell. You can set all that aside and still say, there's something of the divine within me and within you, within this moment, within this struggle. And therefore, there's got to be something good up ahead. But if it doesn't start interiorly, there's such a word, in our inner life, I'm not sure how else where we put our hooks. Yes, Betty?
I don't think it has to be necessarily hope within Christianity. I mean,
right.
Other religions have hope also.
So,
and,
thank you.
It's, you know, a little different maybe, but.
So I'm framing this as Christian hope because we're in a Christian church, but who was it? Moltmann, the great Christian theologian, who spoke of the spark of, what was it? Spark of hope, spark of God, spark of something. I mean, that's Quaker language. Quakers are Christians, yes, but that language of the spark of the divinity within all human beings, well, then we are in Christianity and far beyond. Right? So, no, Christianity does not have a corner on hope, but it has, especially because of the story of the resurrection, quite frankly. Christianity does have a deep vocabulary about hope. All faith traditions have a mystical aspect. Islam has Sufism. Buddhism is all about the mystical. Hinduism has a meditation-based experience of the divine, a worship-based puja form of the divine. Likewise, Judaism has Hasidism. We studied about that recently, and Kabbalism. These are all mystical ways of experiencing the presence of God, all of which point to hope. Yes, it's not just something that Christians have. Andrew?
Okay, to what you said, like passengers on a plane. Everybody, before you get it, you have the hope that you get to your destination. So however you hope, you get there, you didn't fall from the sky. So the hope is carried you through whatever everybody believed in. She's the hope that carried you, gave you the power to buy the ticket to get on the plane, to get, have the pilot fly. It's a hope that we sit on these chairs and know that we are not gonna fall. So we sit in there, I mean, anything we do, we drive in your car coming here, we're hoping not to get in an accident, and we can.
That's a lovely analogy, though. It carries us forward in the future.
In Judaism, do the Apocrypha?
I'm sorry?
Judaism study the Apocrypha, the Apocrypha?
The Apocrypha?
Yeah.
No, the Apocrypha is Christian writing. Sorry, no, you're right. It's writings of the Jewish people in Greek.
Okay.
Well, we get there another day. Actually,
Well, that's the great mystery. I mean, it's also the thing that Christians, this is one of our basic confessions as Christians, is that a light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot, will not, shall not overcome it. This is a confession we have to make all the time, especially surrounded as we are with such despair and darkness and violence. It's a confession that has to ring through. It has to. I mean, and this is not the same as optimism. This is not a vapid optimism, right? Hope is different. Hope has a defiance to it. Optimism is just shallow, really. And it's like going against the evidence in front of you. Like, la, 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 la. You know, that's optimism. Hope is saying, oh no, there's something deeper. There's something more powerful. And that's that light that you're talking about. It's deeper and more powerful, and it will overcome the darkness. This is the basic confession of Christians. It has to be. If we believe that, we believe in death and resurrection, right? A sort of crucified God who was resurrected. So this has to be our basic confession, is that a light shines in the darkness.
And how do you get the hope? Like, you just say it, or like, why does that give you hope?
You have to. You have to remind each other. You have to point to it. You have to point it out where you see it, you know? Everything else might be conspiring to convince us otherwise. And Craig Kester is this Lutheran theologian. He wrote this beautiful thing about the reason why it can feel like the forces of darkness and evil are so powerful is because they're raging because they know they've already lost. So if it feels like those forces are so powerful, you have to understand that's out of fear because they know they've already lost. That has to be a basic confession of Christianity. And yet, instead I hear a lot of moral instruction. Like, that matter. I mean, it's just like that's the focus?
That's a double-edged sword.
Oh my gosh. So...
Yeah, can morals cast out demons?
Yeah, exactly. Can morals cast out
Hey guys, listen, gather up. Courtney, put the needle down. Listen, come on, guys.
Exactly. Get the 6-pack of Schlitz out of your fridge, and your demons will go away. But see, we want the ball in our court. We're always going to default to something that's going to mean that we're in charge. It's just easier, you know, because there's something fearsome about saying that God's grace is powerful, more powerful than our morality or our choices or our work in the world, you know. There's something terrifying about that. It's terrifying because we're not in control. We're not in charge.
Shh, cut.
I know. So, and yet, if grace is truly at the center, then we're not in charge and we don't deserve it, and it's more powerful than anything any of our programs or any of the things we can contrive. That we can't.
You can't force grace rhythms?
No,
grace.
man. Just like I think, like, evangelism committees are the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life.
What do you think about Nadia Bolz-Weber's understanding of Christian hope?
It's a battle.
I like the idea that hope embodies defiance,
right?
That concept.
It's a battle, but don't we already, she's saying, I think, that we already know the outcome, right? It's the forces of destruction that don't know. It's as if she's personifying, as if devil, Satan language. We don't use much in liberal churches. She's a liberal pastor, though. she's personifying the forces of destruction, saying they don't know yet that they've been defeated. So we need to point out to each other, she says, signs of hope. And keep moving forward to that day when even the forces of destruction will realize that they have been overcome by love. She talks like a Lutheran. She also says, like a Lutheran says, it's all grace. and hope is itself a gift, like Nancy said. It's a gift. It's a gift to help us survive.
That second point, that did we ever feel hopeless? I had to really search about that. I identified very easily in my life when frustration was part of the deal. But I was so busy that it kept me from wallowing. Do you know what I mean by wallowing? But I remember very clearly about the age of 8, walking in our West Side apartment. Remember the gangways between the apartments, between the bungalows? And I was crying. And I was realizing that my mother was not perfect. That was a very hard moment. And it was the start of my rebellion about things that, looking back, I had a right to rebel. She was a wonderful woman, but she and I did not agree in the style of living. And she wanted me to be the way she wanted me to be, and that was very old-fashioned. Many of us of my age grew up with those alternative lifestyles creating battles. And as I got older, may have had frustration, but correctly, I left home and Dad agreed with me.
Wow.
So I had support.
But that must have been kind of a hopeless situation or challenging.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very unmooring to realize that your parents are human. And
I was expected by the relatives all lived at home until I got married. That was the overarching thing of that era.
So hope is not optimism. Hope can be a function of privilege. That's something that Curtis DeYoung said. We did not have time to talk about.
Also, as your eyes
Hope
get wider and see more
Yep.
alternatives and seeking out people who gave you alternatives. Because you can't just sit back and wait for things to happen. You have to move. And I think hope is part of why you move.
Keeps us going forward. Hope is a gift. It's grace. And it takes time and some kind of experience of the faithfulness of that still turning point that still point in a turning world. I'd like to end with this, I think, inspiring clip by Melvin Bray. Melvin Bray and he's speaking from the Wild Goose Festival, which is an annual festival of storytelling, music, art, justice, peace, community. He's an award-winning storyteller, social entrepreneur, author, literature teacher, and a consultant in equity, diversity, and inclusion. He lives in Atlanta. Melvin Bray.
His last name spelled B-R-A-Y?
Exactly.
I went to school with him, Thomas Bray.
Yeah.
The idea that I have an opportunity to make a better world for my children. It is, and for others, one of the things I've been teaching them is this idea that if God is the God we say she is, then she has to be a God who cares for others as much as she cares for us. This is a great book called Old Turtle and the Broken Truth, right? And the way the author kind of tells the story, it's this idea that humanity has fought one another because they've been holding a broken truth. And that broken truth is that we are loved. And the part that is missing the part that we have to have the strength of imagination to go in search of and to find. And I think we have found it this weekend at the Wild Goose, at least caught a glimpse of it, is not only are we loved, but so are they. And so that gets me up in the morning, the opportunity to create a world where people know that we are loved, where my children know and my neighbors know and strangers know that, yes, I am loved, but so are they.
Who is they? Who are the others, and how far does love go? When does it end?
Wow. It's interesting you should use that language of others, because I've been thinking about that, and I'm becoming suspicious of our tendency to other, right? I know we don't mean harm. We're trying to find language by which we can talk about the fact that there are people whose stories are not like mine, whose experience is different than mine, right? But I think what happens is all too often we other people and make them objects. We objectify them. We objectify their story. It's kind of like European colonization of the Americas. I'm going to wipe out the Plains Indians, and then I'm going to build these beautiful museum acknowledgments of their former existence. But I'm not even going to ask them to tell the story. I'm going to tell their story for them. So there's a lot of objectification, I think, that inadvertently comes when we start getting comfortable with language of the other, and forget that they are us, right? And you know, it's one of those plays on words that we have to wrestle with. But I just, you know, I want to constantly be reminded that my story is not your story. I need to take time to learn your story. But by the same token, you are my brother. You are my sister. You are not this objectified group of people who we refer to as the least of these. Right? Because Jesus didn't leave it there. He didn't leave it at the least of these. He said, the least of these, my kin, my brothers, my sisters.
What makes your soul sing?
These moments, these thin moments, as my brother Anthony talked about last night. Moments like this where heaven and earth seem to have met and kissed and seen something in common, has stopped for a moment to other itself, but has come and said these worlds were meant to be integrated. That makes my heart sing, because it gives me hope that there is something better than what I have known and than my best intentions.
What do you see in children?
I see a chance to get right everything that I've gotten wrong. I see in children people who still dare to dream. Nicole Nordeman, one of my favorite songwriters, CCM songwriters, writes a song called Help Me Believe, because I don't want to miss the miracles. Take me back to a time when I was maybe 8 or 9 and I believed, man. And not this uncritical certitude that we tend to have in mind when we talk about belief, but I had the faith that something more was possible, that something more was tangible, was tasteable, was right there, and what had to happen was I needed to learn how to apprehend it, not it. I needed to create it. And I see that in children. I see that in children. And so I've made some new friends here, some little friends, not just my own children, but made some new younger friends while I've been here, and it excites me because I look forward to seeing them next year and seeing how they've grown. Oh my God.
Are you alive?
Oh, I am very much alive and grateful for that life. Every time I suck breath, every time I breathe, I say, peace is here and it is available. And that is because God has given me this grace of life. I met a Nigerian brother on the train. I take the metro back and forth, the MARTA in Atlanta, which is just subway, back and forth to work. every day. I live in West End, Atlanta, over near the Atlanta AU Center, Clark Atlanta, Morehouse, and Spelman, and the like. But I work uptown and for a corporation in Buckhead, Atlanta. And one day on my ride back home, I met a couple from Nigeria who had been vacationing in Atlanta. And we were having foul weather. It was right after a snow or ice storm that we had earlier this year. And I apologized for the nasty weather. And what they said to me, I'll never forget what the brother said to me. He said, all kinds of weather are a grace. Our grace. And so this is a grace. This life, this breath, it is a grace.